Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Psychology from My Kitchen. I'm Mrs. Sarah Ryan, and by the way, my kitchen changed because my family and I moved. Um, Today, we are continuing in AP Psychology in Unit 9, which is development. So, we talked in our last video how in development we are studying people from womb to tomb. And of course, we start with the womb in the beginning, but now today we're looking at what happens when those little bundles of joy are actually born and what's going to happen with that developmental maturation process. So today we're looking at little kids and what are some of the developmental milestones that we see physically as well as psychologically and socially, and social, emotional, and a cognitive kind of element. What are all those pieces that we're likely going to see as children grow? I can tell you right now that parents, especially, are extremely interested in this topic, wanting to know, is my kid doing the things that they're supposed to be doing? Are they developing the way that they're supposed to? Are there any kind of red flags? And while sometimes that can be kind of like borderline paranoia and that kind of a thing, in a lot of ways it's actually really good that the sooner that we're able to identify that perhaps a child isn't meeting a certain milestone by a certain time period, we can start implementing different types of interventions that can be really beneficial to that child. And so the study of development has had some really significant um, positive consequences for young children moving forward. And that by studying what is quote unquote normal, being able to identify abnormal and then having strategies to help mitigate that have had some really positive effects for people. So we're going to start by looking at some of the physical attributes to maturation. What are the physical things that little kids are going to be able to do? So first of all, when babies are born, they come out into the world and they don't really move a whole lot, which is kind of strange. Like they can move their arms and they can move their legs, but they're really sporadic. They're very like jerky kinds of motions. Sometimes they can even freak themselves out, like hitting themselves with their hand because they don't quite have a lot of coordination yet. And that of course is going to come from the use of the cerebellum. So looking at our motor skills, first of all, we identify two different types of motor skills for young children, what are known as gross motor skills and fine motor skills. Gross motor skills are going to be large movements that children are going to be capable of doing. So that's going to be like your crawling, your walking, running, jumping, being able to pedal a bike, being able to go up and down stairs. Those are really these large or gross motor movements. Fine motor movements, on the other hand, are going to be very detail specific. A lot of them, of course, are going to deal with your hands and being able to use your hands, manipulate things with your hands, being able to grasp, being able to, it's called a pincher motion, where I can pick something up with my two fingers, and you'll see little babies try to like go for those Cheerios and things like that. That's going to be a precursor to being able to use utensils, being able to use writing implements, being able to draw and to color, all of those kinds of things that we would consider a fine motor skill. So real important in all of our development, especially with young children, is that there are going to be age ranges that we look for children to achieve some type of task. So there's not necessarily a specific date or age that a child is going to be when they master a particular skill. There's a range. And again, this is part of what gets parents freaked out, especially when they have multiple children and they're like, oh, well, child one was capable of doing ABC by this age, but child two isn't doing those things. Is there a problem? And it's like, well, if they're in that range of normal, then no, like that's not really a big deal. That children are going to develop these tasks kind of in their own timeline. So when it comes to motor development, actually the first major physical skill that children are going to master is being able to control their head, that they've developed enough strength in their neck that they're able to lift their head up. That's really goal number one, being able to lift the head. And that comes from being down on their stomachs and being able to push themselves up and gain control of that neck coordination. That's going to be a precursor to being able to push yourself up and being able to crawl. Not every child actually crawls. Some children, they figure out that they want to be able to move, they want to be able to get somewhere, but it's not always through crawling. Some children are going to roll. Some children who start sitting up, they might do this like butt scoot motion wherever it is that they're going to go. Some children do kind of like an army crawl, that sort of a thing. And all of those really are normal because they're starting to figure out that they want to move themselves. But a really typical kind of sequence that you would see is that a child is going to start pushing themselves up or pulling themselves up into a sitting position or a position where they're on all fours. That's going to lead to crawling, but more importantly, it's going to lead them to standing and then eventually walking. A lot of children are going to start pulling themselves up, like maybe 9, 10 months old, something like that. They're pulling themselves up. They're doing what's known as creeping. Creeping is where children are standing on 2 feet, but they're like walking around the living room by holding onto the couch, and then they're holding onto the coffee table. And then like they're not really independently going anywhere until then, boom, they start walking. And of course, by walking, and they're going to be running, all of those things are going to be a normal physical maturation process. Another really typical skill that children are going to develop in this age is something known as habituation. Habituation is one of our confusing pairs in AP Psychology. We mentioned it before, way back in Sensation and Perception, when we were talking about sensory adaptation, where in sensory adaptation, my neurons are firing less frequently because they have the same stimulation. So that's why I get used to sounds or I get used to smells, but that doesn't happen with my vision because my eyes are constantly moving. Habituation, on the other hand, is also where I get used to it, but I'm getting used to it because I don't have the same kind of physical or emotional response to a frequently repeated stimulus. So what do I mean by that? Well, in my pictures here, which by the way, lots of these are pictures of my own daughter and then a good friend of ours as well. Little kids do this a lot with toys, where a toy like down here, my daughter is at like a science museum in Toledo, that there's a ball that is being suspended by air pushing up. That, that's really cool. She's really interested and engaged in that. But over time, her attention is going to move on. It's not as cool. It's not as exciting. I don't have the same kind of like, oh wow, that was really neat. That is habituation. And so really young kids actually start figuring out habituation. And that's why they like a lot of variety, a lot of different songs, a lot of different stories, a lot of different toys. I even kid a lot of times that for my own daughter, I would, if she was out of the house, I'd go through and I'd hide all of her toys and I'd get new toys out. But the ones that I hid, I just put down in the basement for a couple of months, and then, I bring them back out again, and oh, they're so exciting again because she hasn't been seeing them. She hasn't been getting used to it. She hasn't habituated. Something else that's really typical for really young babies is they start developing a personality. But at this age, personality is often referred to as their temperament. Temperament is this kind of precursor to, biologically speaking, what is this child very likely going to do? The biggest part of temperament is usually activity level. That sometimes you have little babies who are really, really active. They're always on the go. They're always moving. They might be always into trouble. And then you get other little babies who are just chilling like a villain, right? Like they are very calm. They might be really content. They do stuff, of course, but they're just not, they're not into everything. And so this is kind of a likelihood of what this child is going to grow up to be like. And that's part of our conversation on personality and how much of personality is nature versus nurture sort of a thing. And that we're finding a huge chunk of personality traits and how outgoing I am, how happy I might be, um, how social I might be towards other people. That a lot of that is actually rooted in genetics, and we see that in really young children who wouldn't have otherwise had an opportunity to learn that from anywhere else. Now, we have a couple of famous experiments to talk about today in terms of development, and we're starting with um, a rather controversial one, if I may say so, and that comes from a psychologist named Harry Harlow. So Harlow is interested in how is it that children develop their social emotional bonds with caregivers. There has been a really well documented kind of sense that it seems like mothers in many, many societies are these primary caregivers for young children. And the question always was posed, well, why is it mothers that seem to always be the ones that children they cling to? And Harlow is making the argument that, well, mothers feed, right? That when we look at human beings and how how we work as a species, is that females are capable of breastfeeding. And so because of that, then, oh, well, children are obviously going to create these really strong bonds with their mothers because they're the ones who are doing breastfeeding. And of course, this also leads to a whole other conversation about women who are not capable of breastfeeding for all kinds of different reasons, thinking that they're not as adequate, that's not as good of a thing to, not breastfeed your kid using formula. And so Harlow is going to set up this pretty controversial experiment looking at this exact question. And so what he does is he takes this poor baby monkey and immediately makes this baby monkey leave its mom, which, terrible animal cruelty right there. Would not be doing this experiment in 2021. So what Harlow does is he sets up this experiment with this really small baby monkey, and it has two choices for fake mama monkeys. One of the fake mama monkeys is this, and if you look at my center photo right here, one of the fake mama monkeys, which you can see the monkey clinging to, is covered in soft, warm, furry material. It has more of a monkey face, okay, but then that's it. Whereas next to it is this wire monkey, and the wire monkey has a much more rudimentary face. It does not look as monkey-like. It's just this metal cage. However, that metal cage would dispense food. And so it would dispense food using a milk formula kind of method. And so there'd be a bottle inside of it that the baby would feed from. And so the question is posed is, who is it that this baby monkey is going to spend time with? And Harlow thinks, and many psychologists, they think, well, going to spend time with the monkey that feeds me. It's not the case, as you can see by our baby here. Baby monkey predominantly is going to spend its time as much as possible with the soft, warm mama monkey. That it would cling to soft mama monkey while feeding from wire monkey. It really wants nothing to do with wire monkey except for just being fed. And that instead, what Harlow is able to establish is something that we refer to as contact comfort. Which parent or caregiver is a child more likely going to bond with? They're going to bond with whichever adult in their life is going to give them physical affection and comfort. Which, at the time that this study was done, that was not a thing. It was very much a time where people thought that you needed to create children that were strong and resilient, and that you needed to kind of be all laissez-faire and hands off and let your kid, be real free range and that sort of a thing. But then what this is really telling us is that, kids, they develop bonds with who holds them. They develop bonds with who gives them comfort, and especially a warm, soft kind of comfort. So you go back to like breastfeeding mom, well, there is a whole lot of warm, soft comfort that comes from that. And so that is part of why those children are bonding, but they're also bonding with objects, for example, that they tend to find warm and comfortable. So in my other picture here, you'll see my daughter, and what does she have? Well, she has a baby blanket. Many of you probably had a baby blanket, or you had a stuffed animal or something that was really special to you, and it was probably soft. And the reason for that is because we find that comfort in that warm, snuggly kind of thing, and that goes back to Harlow and his monkey experiments. Finally today, our last experiment to talk about in terms of what's known as attachment comes from a psychologist named Mary Ainsworth. So Ainsworth, while horrified about, taking these poor baby monkeys away from their parents, is still interested in attachment. And, it's not feeding, we know that. But what about when parents who think they're really responsive, who think that they're, are quote unquote good parents, are they really? And so she was interested in what becomes known as an attachment theory. And so the experiment worked something like this. Mary Ainsworth took young children who were somewhere around like the age between 2 and 5, I believe, and they would go into a playroom. Those children were not alone. They went with a primary caregiver. And so in many of these instances, because this was done in the 1970s, this was going to be a mother, but it could be with a father, it could be with a grandparent, that really doesn't matter. But the children, they went into this playroom with a caregiver. And so all we're really looking at is, how do the children play? They go into this playroom. Let's say mom is there with them. How do they interact with the playroom? It's a strange situation. It's nowhere that they have been before. Do they go and play? Do they cling to mom? Okay. What happens when a stranger walks into the room? How does the child react to the stranger? What happens when mom leaves? Dun, dun, dun. And what happens when mom comes back? So this strange situation that was put in place tested all of these different kids and their primary caregiver going into a playroom that they had never been before. And very interestingly, Mary Ainsworth was able to observe several different kinds of behaviors. For some children, when they walked into the playroom with their mom, they were very excited to look at all the different toys. They showed mom the different toys. They knew where mom was. And mom could kind of sit herself down in the middle of the room, and the kid was happily playing with the things that, are in this room. Then the stranger comes in. How do the kids react to the stranger? Well, some kids, stranger, is mom okay with the stranger? Mom's okay with the stranger. I'm okay with the stranger because mom is okay with the stranger. Mom leaves. Not cool with mom leaving. Okay, I am upset about the fact that mom left, but the stranger distracts me, and after a little bit I get over it. I'm good with playing with new stuff, and then hey, look, mom comes back. Happy to see mom again, and that is a very typical kind of behavior that we're seeing from a good chunk of children when they're coming into this strange situation. Mary Ainsworth identified these particular kids as being securely attached to their primary caregiver, that they'd explore the room, but they knew where mom was. When mom leaves, not super happy, okay? They're okay with the stranger because mom is okay with the stranger. And when mom comes back, they're really happy to see mom coming back. And so what Ainsworth is identifying is that these were parents, these were mothers in this particular instance, who are really sensitive and really supportive of their kids. They listen to their children, they provide comfort for their children, that there is a strong, secure relationship between mom and child. But then there were some other behaviors. So you had some kids who, when they walked into this strange situation with mom, they either had nothing to do with mom or they were stage 5 clingers. that they were stuck to mom. Like, I'm not going to explore anything. Okay. Then you have two different types of kids when mom leaves. Some kids totally don't care that mom left. Whatever. Other kids, not only are they unhappy, but they are like beyond upset. They are showing this really intense distress, and that continues. Like, they don't get distracted by anything else. Like, they just, really, really unhappy. You also get some of these kids who they're either okay with the stranger or, totally not okay with the stranger. But here's the really interesting bit. What happens when mom returns? Some of these kids don't even care that mom returned. And other kids, oh, mom returned, the ones who are really, really upset. So now I'm really mad at you. You left me. So we have two different types of insecure attachments going on here. What Ainsworth identified as avoidant insecure and resistant insecure. The avoidant insecure, these are kids whose parents, they kind of ignore them. Like, they want to, mommy, daddy, let me show you this kind of a thing. And they don't really respond. And so when mom leaves and comes back, it doesn't really bother them at all. Whereas resistant insecure children, these come from parents who are really inconsistent with how sensitive and responsive they are to their child and their child's needs. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not there. And so because of this, they are really uncomfortable around other people, and they become real clingy to mom and dad, thinking that, they're going to leave and they're never going to come back. And so Ainsworth is really looking at how does parenting really affect the bonds that children have with their parents. And there's a couple of really important things to note here. Children who grow up with secure attachments to their parents often view themselves as being worthy of respect and worthy of love, whereas avoidant children and ambivalent children tend to have really difficult relationships as they grow older. And so when we look at that parent-child relationship and how important it is, even with really young kids, we know that sets us up in the future and what that's going to be like for that person. How do they view themselves? How do they view loving relationships? That it all can go back to exactly how their parents, really treated them and how important that is. And I know that as students of psychology, sometimes this stuff can get kind of upsetting because it's like, wow, I see how mom and dad maybe treated me and I'm not really okay with it. And that's part of learning, in that we can take that information and become better for the next generation. That sometimes this kind of information can be upsetting, or this kind of information can make us feel uncomfortable because we start to recognize, like, oh, this isn't okay. And I know what this is firsthand, but that can make us better for the future. So when you perhaps become a parent, knowing that, how you treat your child and the type of relationship that you treat your child with, that has some really long-lasting consequences. So we're going to pause there for today. Next time, we're going to start looking at cognitive development in young children. How does our thinking develop? So until next time, thank you for joining me.